The early morning mist hung thick over Brunswick, Georgia, as Detective Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the murky lagoon, watching the recovery team prepare their equipment. It was April 2024, and she'd been with the Brunswick Police Department for 15 years, but nothing in her career had prepared her for what they were about to pull from the water. "Detective, we're ready to begin," called out Jason Chen, lead diver for the Sunshine State Cold Case Diving Team. His voice cut through the humid air, barely audible over the chorus of frogs and insects that populated the wetlands surrounding Route 17. Sarah nodded, her fingers tightening around the coffee cup she'd been nursing since 5 a.m. The steam rose in lazy spirals, disappearing into the fog that seemed to swallow everything in this part of coastal Georgia. She'd read the case file a dozen times since Chen's team had contacted the department 3 days ago. Catherine and Charles Romer, missing since 1980. The case that had haunted Brunswick for over 4 decades. "How certain are you about the vehicle?" she asked, walking closer to the water's edge. Her boots sank slightly into the soft mud, and she could smell the rich, organic decay of the swamp, a smell that would cling to her clothes for days. Chen adjusted his diving mask, his weathered face serious. "We've mapped the entire bottom of this lagoon using side-scan sonar. There's a vehicle down there, approximately 20 feet from shore, submerged in about 12 feet of water and another 8 feet of sediment. The sonar signature matches a 1979 Lincoln Continental, same model the Romers were driving." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The Romer case was legendary in local law enforcement circles, a mystery that had consumed investigators, spawned countless theories, and left a family waiting for answers that never came. She'd been only 6 years old when they disappeared, but growing up in Brunswick meant growing up with the story. Every kid knew about the rich couple who vanished into thin air. "Walk me through how you found it," she said, pulling out her notebook. The pages were already damp from the morning humidity, the ink threatening to smudge. Chen's partner, Maria Rodriguez, emerged from their equipment van carrying additional diving gear. She was younger, maybe 30, with intense dark eyes that suggested she'd seen more than her share of tragedy beneath the water's surface. "We've been working cold cases along the I-95 corridor for 3 years," Maria explained, setting down the equipment. "Missing persons from the 70s and 80s before GPS, before cell phones. Back then, if you drove off the road at night in a remote area, you could disappear completely. We focus on bodies of water near major highways, especially in areas with poor lighting or confusing road configurations. This lagoon is practically invisible from the road," Chen added, pointing toward the highway that ran parallel to the water, about 50 yards away. "At night, especially in 1980 before they improved the lighting, a driver could easily miss a turn. There used to be a small service road that branched off right here. It's overgrown now, but if you look at aerial photos from 1980, you can see it clearly." Sarah walked toward the highway, studying the terrain. The area had changed dramatically in 44 years. What was once a sparsely developed stretch of coastal Georgia had grown into a corridor of gas stations, fast food restaurants, and budget motels. But this particular spot, tucked between a defunct paper mill and an abandoned warehouse, had remained untouched by development. The lagoon itself was hidden behind thick stands of live oak and palmetto, their branches draped with Spanish moss that swayed gently in the breeze. "The Royal Palms Motel was just a quarter-mile north," Sarah said, more to herself than to the divers. "They checked in around 8 p.m. on April 15, 1980. The clerk remembered them because they paid cash, and Charles Romer tipped generously. Said they were heading to their winter home in Boynton Beach. They never made it out of Brunswick," Maria said quietly. Sarah turned back to face the lagoon. Somewhere beneath that dark water lay the answer to a mystery that had tormented the Romer family for decades. She thought about the children, now in their 60s and 70s themselves, who had spent their entire adult lives wondering what happened to their parents, the grandchildren who had never known them, the inheritance battles, the conspiracy theories, the private investigators who had chased leads from New York to Key West, finding nothing. "What's the procedure?" she asked. Chen checked his dive watch. "We'll send down an ROV first, remotely operated vehicle, to get visual confirmation and assess the condition of the vehicle. If everything checks out, Maria and I will dive down to secure lifting cables. The recovery barge should be here within the hour. We'll need to work carefully. After 44 years underwater, that car is going to be fragile, and anything inside. He paused, choosing his words carefully. We need to preserve whatever evidence remains. Evidence. Sarah knew what he really meant. Bodies, or what was left of them after more than 4 decades submerged in a Georgia swamp. A white coroner's van pulled up behind the police vehicles, and Dr. Robert Hayes emerged, carrying his field kit. He was 73, the same age Catherine Romer had been when she disappeared. He'd been the assistant coroner in 1980, and had worked the case during its first investigation. Never thought I'd see this day, Hayes said, his voice thick with emotion. He stood beside Sarah, staring at the lagoon. I was 31 years old when they disappeared, fresh out of medical school, eager to make a difference. This case, it stayed with me. Changed the way I looked at every missing person after that. You worked the original investigation? Sarah asked. Hayes nodded slowly. For months. We searched everywhere, interviewed hundreds of people, followed up on every tip, no matter how crazy. We had theories about kidnapping, murder, robbery gone wrong. Charles Romer was wealthy, made a fortune in the Texas oil industry. Some people thought it was a professional hit. Others believed they'd been carjacked. There were even rumors they'd staged their own disappearance, that Charles had gambling debts or was involved in some shady business deals. What did you think? I thought they were dead, Hayes said simply. But I couldn't prove it. No bodies, no crime scene, no evidence of foul play. Just gone. As if they'd driven into another dimension. The ROV operator, a young tech named Brandon, called out from beside the equipment van. We're ready to deploy. Sarah watched as Brandon guided the small underwater robot into the lagoon. Its lights cut through the murky water, illuminating clouds of sediment that swirled like smoke. On the monitor, she could see the ghostly landscape of the lagoon floor. Mud, fallen branches, the occasional fish darting past the camera. Depth is 10 feet, Brandon reported. Visibility is poor, about 3 feet. Water temperature is 72 degrees, moving to target coordinates. The team gathered around the monitor, silent except for the hum of the ROV's motors and the distant sounds of morning traffic on Route 17. Sarah found herself holding her breath as the robot descended deeper, its lights probing the darkness. Then, emerging from the gloom like a phantom, the shape appeared on screen. Contact, Brandon said. Vehicle confirmed. Sarah leaned closer to the monitor. The car was buried nose down in the sediment, only the rear portion visible. The trunk and back window were coated in mud and algae, but the distinctive shape of a late 70s Lincoln Continental was unmistakable. The chrome bumper, though corroded, still caught the ROV's lights. Can you get a plate number? Sarah asked. Brandon maneuvered the ROV carefully, using its manipulator arm to clear some of the growth from the license plate. The camera focused, and through decades of decay, numbers emerged. New York plates. Sarah checked her notes. The registration matched. It's them, she whispered. Doctor. Hayes moved closer to the screen, his hands trembling slightly. After all these years. The ROV continued its survey, moving around the vehicle. The driver's side window was open, or had been broken. Inside, the camera's lights revealed the preserved interior of the car, filled with sediment but still recognizable. And there, in the front seats, were shapes that Sarah had learned to recognize in her years of law enforcement. Human remains, held in place by seatbelts, preserved by the mud and cold water that had entombed them for 44 years. 2 individuals, Brandon confirmed, his professional tone not quite masking the emotion in his voice. Driver and passenger position. Sarah stepped back from the monitor, pulling out her phone. She had calls to make, to the chief, to the FBI field office in Jacksonville. to the Romer family attorney who had kept the case alive all these years. But for a moment, she just stood there, looking out at the lagoon that had kept its secret for so long. The sun was beginning to burn through the morning fog, casting golden light across the water. Birds called from the trees, and in the distance she could hear the rumble of trucks on the interstate. Life going on, indifferent to the tragedy that had unfolded here so long ago. "How did no one find this sooner?" Maria asked, echoing the question that Sarah knew everyone would be asking. Chen pointed to the overgrown vegetation surrounding the lagoon. "Look at how dense that growth is. This water is set back from the road, hidden by trees. In 1980, there were fewer people living in this area, less development, fewer reasons for anyone to be poking around here. And the lagoon itself, it's shallow near the edges but drops off quickly. From the shore, you'd never know there was a vehicle down there. The mud and vegetation would have covered it within weeks. Someone must have seen them go in," Sarah said. That night, April 15th, 1980. Someone must have seen or heard something. "Maybe," Hayes said. "Or maybe it happened fast. Dark night, unfamiliar roads, one wrong turn. It's possible they were in the water before they even realized what was happening. The car could have filled in minutes, maybe seconds if the windows were down." Sarah thought about Catherine and Charles Romer, elderly and probably tired after a long day of driving. They'd left New York on April 12th, taking their time, enjoying what they thought would be a pleasant drive to their winter home. They'd stopped in Brunswick because it was getting late, checked into a motel, probably had dinner somewhere. And then, in the darkness, on an unfamiliar road, something went wrong. One moment they were planning the rest of their journey. The next, they were plunging into black water, trapped in a vehicle that was pulling them down into the mud. "I need to notify the family," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. The Romer family attorney, Gerald Whitmore, answered on the third ring. His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who had delivered bad news too many times before. But Sarah could hear the sharp intake of breath when she explained why she was calling. "You're certain it's them?" Whitmore asked. His office was in Scarsdale, New York, where the Romers had lived before their retirement plans took them south each winter. "As certain as we can be without formal identification," Sarah replied, watching the recovery barge maneuver into position on the lagoon. "The vehicle matches the registration, and the remains of 2 individuals are inside. We'll need dental records, but Mr. Whitmore, after 44 years, I don't think there's much doubt." There was a long silence on the line. Sarah could hear papers rustling, the sound of a chair creaking. When Whitmore spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I was 28 years old when they disappeared. Fresh out of law school, just starting to build my practice. Charles Romer was my first major client. He trusted me with his business affairs, his estate planning, and then..." He paused. "Do you have any idea what this has done to the family? The not knowing?" "I can imagine," Sarah said, though she knew she really couldn't. How could anyone truly understand what it meant to lose someone without explanation, to spend decades in limbo between grief and hope? "The children will want to come down," Whitmore continued. "Michael Romer, he's the eldest, 76 now, lives in Connecticut, and Elizabeth Chen, she married and moved to California. She's 73. They've never stopped looking for answers, Detective. Never stopped hoping." Sarah watched as Chen and Rodriguez suited up for their dive. The morning had grown warmer, the humidity climbing toward the oppressive heat that would dominate the afternoon. Already her shirt was sticking to her back, and the sun hadn't fully cleared the tree line. "There's something else you should know," Whitmore said. "In 1985, Charles Romer was declared legally dead so the estate could be settled. The children had no choice. They couldn't access accounts, couldn't manage properties, couldn't move forward with their own lives. It tore them apart, that decision. Michael wanted to wait, thought his parents might still be alive somewhere. Elizabeth argued they needed closure, needed to accept reality. It created a rift that took years to heal." "What about the estate?" Sarah asked. "I read in the original case file that there were some questions about financial motives." Whitmore's response was immediate and sharp. The children were investigated thoroughly, Detective. Their alibis were solid, their finances were examined, and nothing, absolutely nothing, suggested they had any involvement. Michael was in Boston for a medical conference when his parents disappeared. Elizabeth was home in California with her husband and 3 children. The suggestion that they somehow arranged their parents' deaths for inheritance money is not only false but deeply offensive to a family that has suffered immeasurably. "I apologize," Sarah said. "I had to ask." "I know." Whitmore's voice softened. "I know you're doing your job, it's just... This family has been through hell. The police investigations, the private detectives, the media attention, the conspiracy theorists. Every few years, someone would claim to have seen Charles and Catherine in Florida, in Mexico, in Europe. Each time, the family's hopes would rise, and each time, they'd be crushed when it turned out to be nothing." Sarah made notes as he spoke, building a picture of the aftermath, the human cost of a mystery that had consumed lives beyond just those who had disappeared. "I'll need to speak with the children," she said, "once we've completed the recovery and confirmed identification." "They'll cooperate fully," Whitmore assured her. "Michael especially. He's kept every document, every police report, every newspaper article about the case. He's been the keeper of their parents' memory, determined that they wouldn't be forgotten." After ending the call, Sarah walked to where Dr. Hayes was setting up his field equipment. The recovery operation was entering its critical phase. Chen and Rodriguez were in the water now, their air tanks creating streams of bubbles that broke the surface in rhythmic patterns. "How long will the recovery take?" Sarah asked. Hayes adjusted his equipment, his movements practiced and efficient despite his age. "Depends on the condition of the vehicle and how deeply it's embedded in the sediment. Could be hours. The divers will attach lift cables and then the barge will raise it slowly, very slowly. The last thing we want is for the vehicle to break apart or for the remains to be damaged further." "What can you tell from the initial images?" Hayes pulled up the ROV footage on a tablet, zooming in on specific frames. "The bodies appear to be relatively well preserved, which makes sense given the environment. Cold water, low oxygen levels in the sediment, minimal disturbance. These all work in favor of preservation. I'm seeing what looks like clothing, possibly leather shoes, jewelry. The seat belts are still intact, which suggests they were wearing them when the vehicle entered the water." "That's unusual, isn't it?" Sarah asked. "For the 1980s. "Somewhat," Hayes agreed. Seatbelt laws weren't universal back then, and many older drivers didn't use them habitually. But Charles Romer was a cautious man according to all accounts, an engineer by training, methodical, the kind of person who would wear a seatbelt even when it wasn't required by law. Sarah studied the images, trying to piece together what had happened that night. "The driver's side window is open. Could they have tried to escape?" "Possible," Hayes said. "But in a situation like this, with a vehicle sinking rapidly in dark water, panic would set in immediately. The water pressure would make opening doors nearly impossible once the car was submerged. Windows might open, but then water would flood in faster. They were elderly, probably disoriented, possibly injured from the impact. Even if they got the window open, escaping would have been incredibly difficult." A voice crackled over the radio. "We're secured and ready for lift," Chen reported from the water, starting ascent. Everyone on shore moved closer, watching as the barge's winch began to turn. The cables grew taut, pulling against decades of mud and sediment. For several minutes, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, the water began to roil and bubble as the vehicle started to rise. The trunk emerged first, streaming water and mud, covered in algae and aquatic growth. The distinctive shape of the Lincoln Continental became more visible as it rose, the long, elegant lines that had made it a symbol of American luxury in the late 70s. But there was nothing elegant about it now. The paint had been stripped away by time and water, leaving bare, corroded metal. The rear window was miraculously intact, though so covered in sediment that nothing could be seen through it. "Easy, easy," Chen's voice called out over the radio. "The frame is compromised, take it slow." The barge's operator adjusted his controls and the ascent slowed to a crawl. Inch by inch, The vehicle emerged from the water that had held it for 44 years. The back doors came into view, then the rear passenger compartment, then finally the front seats. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as the interior became visible. Even from shore, even through the coating of mud and decay, she could see them. Catherine and Charles Romer, still seated side by side, seatbelts across their chests, preserved by the very water that had killed them. "Jesus," muttered one of the uniformed officers standing nearby. "Show respect," Sarah snapped, her voice harder than she intended. "Those are people. Someone's parents, someone's grandparents." The vehicle reached the barge's deck and Chen and Rodriguez climbed aboard, immediately setting to work securing it for transport. Sarah could see them moving carefully around the car, documenting everything with cameras before they would attempt to remove the remains. Her phone buzzed. A text message from Chief Morrison. "Media got wind of it. They're on their way. Press conference at 2 p.m. Sarah checked her watch. It was just past 10 a.m. 4 hours to process the scene, secure the evidence, and prepare a statement that would finally close one of Brunswick's oldest mysteries. She thought about Michael and Elizabeth Romer, probably going about their morning routines, unaware that the answer they'd sought for 44 years was being lifted from a muddy lagoon in coastal Georgia. By evening, they would know. The not knowing would end, replaced by a different kind of pain, the certainty of loss, the knowledge that their parents had died alone and afraid in the dark water. "Detective," Dr. Hayes called out, "we're ready to begin the removal process. I'll need you to witness and document." Sarah grabbed her camera and made her way to the barge. Up close, the scene was even more sobering. The interior of the car was a time capsule of 1980. The dashboard design, the bench seats, the simple radio with its mechanical tuning dial. But it was also a tomb, filled with the belongings of two people who had never reached their destination. A suitcase was visible in the back seat, partially buried in sediment. Sarah could make out what looked like a purse on the floor of the passenger side. And there, on the dashboard, was a road map of Florida, its pages fused together by decades underwater. "The male victim is in the driver's seat," Hayes narrated for the record, his voice professionally detached. "Advanced decomposition, but skeletal remains are largely intact. Clothing appears to be a button-down shirt and slacks. Wedding ring visible on left hand. The female victim is in the passenger seat, similar state of preservation. Appears to be wearing a dress or skirt. Jewelry visible, including what looks like a necklace and earrings." Chen approached Sarah quietly. "There's something else you should see," he said, pointing to the steering wheel. "Look at the hands." Sarah leaned in carefully, trying not to disturb anything. Charles Romer's skeletal hands were still gripping the wheel, frozen in that position for 44 years. Even in death, even as the flesh decayed and the water claimed everything else, his last action had been to hold on, to try to maintain control of a situation that was beyond saving. "He never let go," Sarah whispered. "No," Chen agreed. "He died trying to save them both." By noon, the Lincoln Continental sat in a secured bay at the Brunswick County Forensic Center, water still dripping from its corroded frame onto the concrete floor. Sarah stood outside the processing room, watching through the observation window as Dr. Hayes and his team worked with painstaking precision to document every detail before removing the remains. The media had descended on Brunswick like a storm. News vans lined the street outside the police station, satellite dishes pointed skyward, reporters practicing their segments about the couple who had been missing for 44 years. Sarah had already fielded a dozen calls from national outlets, CNN, NBC, even a producer from a true crime podcast that had covered the Romer case in a series 2 years ago. Chief Morrison appeared beside her, holding 2 cups of coffee. He was 62, barrel-chested, with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent his career in coastal Georgia. He'd been a patrol officer in 1980, one of the first responders when the Romers were reported missing. "I never thought we'd find them," he said quietly, handing her a cup. "Back then we searched for months, interviewed everyone at that motel, checked every rest stop between here and Florida, followed up on hundreds of tips. We had FBI agents, state police, even brought in psychics when the family got desperate. What was the prevailing theory? Sarah asked, sipping the bitter coffee. Morrison leaned against the wall, his eyes distant with memory. Most of us thought it was foul play. Charles Romer had money, millions from his oil business in Texas. He was known to carry cash, always wore an expensive watch. The thinking was that someone at the motel spotted them, saw an elderly couple with wealth and followed them when they left. Maybe tried to rob them. Things went bad. They ended up dead and buried somewhere we'd never find them. But you searched the motel? Every inch. Interviewed the staff multiple times. The clerk who checked them in, a 20-year-old kid named Danny Sullivan. He passed 2 polygraphs. Said the Romers checked in around 8 p.m., paid cash for the room, asked about restaurants nearby. Danny recommended a seafood place down the road. They took their luggage to the room, then came back about 30 minutes later, got in their car and drove off. That was the last time anyone saw them. Sarah made notes. Did they eat at the restaurant? We checked. No one there remembered seeing them, but it was a busy night. The restaurant didn't keep reservations for walk-ins back then, and they did mostly cash business. If the Romers stopped there, paid cash and left, there'd be no record. So what happened after they left the motel? Morrison shrugged. That's the mystery. The Royal Palms was about a quarter-mile north of where we found the car. The logical route back to the motel from the restaurant would have taken them south on Route 17. But somehow, they ended up going the wrong way. Or they took a detour, or... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Or they were forced off the road. You still think someone was involved? I don't know what to think, Morrison admitted. The car is headed north when it went into the water, away from the motel. Why would they be going north? They'd already checked in, their luggage was in the room. Where were they going? It was a good question, one that Sarah had been wrestling with since the discovery. She pulled out her phone and accessed the digital case file, scrolling through the timeline of events from April 15, 1980. The motel clerk said they left around 8:30 p.m. She read aloud. Sunset that day was at 7:52 p.m., so it was already dark. If they went to the restaurant, let's say that took an hour, they wouldn't be back until 9:30, but they never made it back to the motel. Right, Morrison said. So either they got lost trying to find their way back or something else happened. Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed an Atlanta number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously. Detective Mitchell, this is Michael Romer. The voice was elderly but strong, controlled despite the emotion Sarah could hear beneath it. Gerald Whitmore gave me your number. He said you found my parents. Sarah stepped away from Morrison, moving to a quieter corner of the hallway. Mr. Romer, I'm so sorry for your loss, yes. We've recovered a vehicle matching your parents' car from a lagoon here in Brunswick. We're in the process of identifying the remains, but based on the evidence, it's them. Michael interrupted. I know it's them. I've known for 44 years that they were dead. I just didn't know where. His voice cracked slightly. Where exactly did you find them? Sarah described the location, the lagoon hidden from the road, the circumstances of the discovery. Michael listened in silence, and when she finished, he let out a long, shaky breath. A lagoon, he said, less than a mile from their motel. They were there the whole time. All those years, all the searches, all the theories about kidnapping and murder, and they were right there. Mr. Romer, I need to ask you some questions about that night. I know it was a long time ago, but any detail you remember might help us understand what happened. I'll tell you everything I know, Michael said. But I'm coming to Brunswick. My sister and I both are. We need to be there, need to see where they were found. Can you recommend a hotel? Sarah gave him the name of a decent place near the police station, then began her questions. When was the last time you spoke to your parents? The morning of April 15th. I called them at the motel around 9 a.m. My father answered. He sounded good, said they'd had a pleasant drive down from New York, were taking their time, enjoying the scenery. They planned to spend one more night in Brunswick, then drive the rest of the way to Boynton Beach the next day. Did they mention any problems? Anyone following them? Any concerns about safety? Nothing like that. My father was a careful man, detective. He'd driven that route dozens of times. He knew to stick to major highways to avoid shortcuts. He was in good health, sharp mentally. My mother was the same. They were both looking forward to spending the winter in Florida, seeing friends, playing golf. They had everything to live for. What about their relationship? Any marital problems, financial stress? Michael's voice turned cold. I know what you're implying, and the answer is no. My parents were devoted to each other. 52 years of marriage, detective. They didn't fake their deaths, they didn't run away to start a new life, and they certainly didn't commit suicide. Whatever happened that night was an accident or a crime, but it wasn't voluntary. I apologize, Sarah said, but I have to ask these questions. I understand, Michael replied, his tone softening. I've answered them 100 times over the years. The police in 1980, the private investigators we hired, the journalists who called every few years when they wanted to write about the case. Everyone always wondered if maybe my parents had some secret life, some reason to disappear. But there was nothing. They were exactly who they appeared to be. Retired, comfortable, looking forward to a peaceful old age together. Sarah heard papers rustling in the background. Did your parents carry much cash when they traveled? My father always kept several $100s on him. He didn't trust credit cards, preferred cash for small purchases. But it wasn't thousands of dollars, nothing that would make them a major target for robbery. And his watch, the one everyone always mentioned, it was a nice Omega, but not extremely valuable. Maybe worth $2,000 at the time. What about enemies? Business rivals? Disgruntled employees? My father had been retired for 5 years by 1980. He'd sold his oil company, settled all his affairs, had no ongoing business conflicts. The sale went smoothly. Everyone was paid fairly. I've gone over this 1,000 times in my mind, detective. There's no one who would have wanted to hurt them. After the call ended, Sarah returned to the observation window. Dr. Hayes was photographing something inside the vehicle, his assistant taking measurements and making notes. The scene had the quiet intensity of archaeological excavation, the careful revelation of evidence that had been buried for decades. Morrison rejoined her. The family. Coming down tomorrow, Michael Romer and his sister. Sarah watched as Hayes used a small brush to clear sediment from what looked like a wallet on the driver's side floor. He confirmed what you said. His father was careful, experienced with that route. No reason to get lost or take risks. Then what the hell happened? Morrison asked, frustration evident in his voice. Sarah's mind worked through the possibilities, constructing and discarding scenarios. An elderly couple leaves their motel in the dark. They're heading back after dinner, or maybe they never made it to dinner. Somehow they end up on a service road they shouldn't be on, driving toward a lagoon they can't see. The car goes into the water, sinks quickly. They're trapped, disoriented, unable to escape. But why were they there? What drew them to that specific location? Chief, she said slowly, what was at that location in 1980? The paper mill was already abandoned by then, right? Morrison nodded. Closed in 1976. Been sitting empty since then. The warehouse was still operating, but they closed at 6 p.m. By the time the roamers went into the water, the area would have been completely deserted, so there's no legitimate reason for them to be there. None that I can think of. Sarah turned away from the window, a theory beginning to form. What if they were following someone? What if someone at the motel or the restaurant told them something, gave them directions somewhere, and they ended up in the wrong place? Like what? I don't know yet, but people don't accidentally drive into lagoons, especially careful drivers like Charles Romer. Something made them turn onto that service road. Something or someone. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Hayes. Come to the lab, found something in the vehicle. Sarah and Morrison hurried down the hallway to the processing room. Hayes stood beside the opened passenger door, holding an evidence bag. Inside was a deteriorated piece of paper, preserved by the protective plastic of what appeared to be a motel notepad. It was in the door pocket, Hayes explained. The plastic kept most of the water out. You can still make out some writing. Sarah took the bag, holding it up to the light. The paper was badly damaged, but visible were handwritten words in blue ink. The letters slightly smeared but legible. Ocean Breeze Marina, and below it what looked like a name. Sullivan. Sullivan, Morrison breathed. That's the name of the motel clerk, Danny Sullivan. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The one who checked them in. He's still in Brunswick, Morrison said. Runs a fishing charter business now. Lives over on St. Simon's Island. Sarah carefully set down the evidence bag. After 44 years, they had their first real clue. Not about what happened, but about where the roamers were going when they died. Get me Danny Sullivan's current address, she said. It's time we had a conversation about what really happened on April 15th, 1980. Danny Sullivan's house sat on a quiet street on St. Simon's Island, a modest two-story with weathered blue siding and a boat trailer parked in the driveway. Sarah and Morrison pulled up just after 2 p.m., the afternoon heat shimmering off the pavement. Through the front window, Sarah could see movement. Someone was home. Sullivan answered the door on the second knock. He was in his early 60s now, with sun-weathered skin, thinning gray hair, and the lean build of someone who spent his days on the water. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Morrison's uniform. "Chief Morrison," he said, his voice cautious. "Been a long time." "Hello, Danny," Morrison replied. "This is Detective Sarah Mitchell. We need to talk to you about April 15th, 1980. The color drained from Sullivan's face. He gripped the door frame, and for a moment Sarah thought he might collapse. "You found them," he whispered. "After all these years, you finally found them." "Can we come in?" Sarah asked gently. Sullivan nodded, stepping back to let them enter. The house was neat but lived in, filled with nautical decorations and photographs of fishing trips. On the mantel was a framed picture of a younger Sullivan with a woman and 2 children, all smiling on a boat dock. "That's my family," Sullivan said, noticing Sarah's gaze. "My wife passed 6 years ago. Cancer. The kids are grown now, have families of their own." He gestured to the couch. "Please sit. Can I get you something to drink? Water? Sweet tea?" "We're fine," Sarah said, settling onto the couch. Morrison remained standing near the doorway, his posture alert. "Mr. Sullivan, we recovered a vehicle from a lagoon off Route 17 this morning. A 1979 Lincoln Continental registered to Charles and Catherine Romer." Sullivan sank into an armchair, his hands trembling. "I knew something happened to them. I always knew. But not knowing for sure, not having any answers, it's haunted me for 44 years. "Tell us about that night," Sarah said, pulling out her notebook. "Everything you remember." Sullivan took a deep breath, his eyes distant with memory. "It was a Tuesday, quiet night at the Royal Palms. We didn't get much business midweek in April before the summer season started. The Romers checked in around 8 p.m. I remember Mr. Romer because he was so polite, so dignified. He paid cash for the room, tipped me $20 just for carrying their bags. $20 was a lot of money in 1980. What did they talk about? Mr. Romer asked about restaurants nearby. I recommended Skipper's Seafood, said it was the best place in town. Mrs. Romer asked if it was walking distance, but I told her it was about 2 miles down the road, better to drive. They took their luggage to room 14, then came back about 30 minutes later. What were they wearing? Sullivan's brow furrowed with concentration. Mr. Romer had on slacks and a button-down shirt, I think it was blue. Mrs. Romer wore a dress, something light-colored. They looked like what they were. Wealthy retirees enjoying their travels. You said they came back 30 minutes later, Sarah prompted. Where were they going? Sullivan's hands gripped the arms of his chair. This is the part I've regretted every day for 44 years. When they came back through the lobby, Mr. Romer asked me something. He said, and I remember his exact words. He said, "Young man, my wife and I have a special anniversary coming up. I want to do something memorable for her. Do you know of any places around here where I could arrange something romantic? Maybe a private boat cruise or a waterfront venue?" Sarah felt a chill despite the warm room. What did you tell him? I told him about the Ocean Breeze Marina. It wasn't really a marina anymore by 1980. It had closed down a few years earlier. But it was this beautiful spot on the water where rich people used to keep their yachts. The property was for sale, and my uncle, Tommy Sullivan, was the realtor handling it. I thought maybe Uncle Tommy could show them the property, maybe arrange something special. Mr. Romer seemed so eager to surprise his wife. "So you gave them directions to the marina?" Sullivan nodded miserably. "I wrote down my uncle's name and the marina location on a notepad. I told Mr. Romer that the marina was just up the road, that if he drove north on Route 17 for about half a mile, there'd be an old sign for Ocean Breeze on the right. The entrance was just past that sign." He paused, his voice breaking. "But I made a mistake. There were two old marina signs on Route 17. The real Ocean Breeze Marina was a mile north. The first sign, the one I should have warned them about, that was for the old Brunswick Boat Works that had gone out of business. The entrance there didn't lead to anything anymore, just an overgrown service road that went down to a lagoon." Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. They took the wrong turn. In the dark, not knowing the area, they must have seen that first sign and thought it was the place. The service road looked like a real entrance back then. It wasn't completely overgrown yet. They would have driven down it thinking they were going to meet my uncle, to see this romantic waterfront property. Instead, Sullivan's voice trailed off. Morrison spoke up from his position by the door. "Danny, in 1980, you told investigators that the Romers left the motel and you never saw them again. You never mentioned any of this." Sullivan's face crumpled. "I was 20 years old, Chief. When the police started asking questions, started treating it like a crime, I panicked. I thought if I told them what I'd done, they'd blame me for their deaths. And maybe they'd be right to blame me. I gave them bad directions, sent them to the wrong place. If I'd been more careful, if I'd been clearer, they'd still be alive." "Your uncle," Sarah said. "Tommy Sullivan. Did the Romers ever contact him?" "No. Uncle Tommy died in 1992, never knew anything about it. I never told him. I never told anyone." Sullivan looked up at them, tears streaming down his face. "Do you know what it's like to carry that guilt? To know that two people died because of your mistake? I've relived that night 1,000 times, thought about all the ways I could have been clearer, could have drawn them a map, could have offered to drive them there myself." Sarah studied him carefully. His grief seemed genuine, his regret palpable. But she'd interviewed enough suspects to know that emotion could be manufactured, that the most convincing performances came from those with the most to hide. "Mr. Sullivan, where were you between 8:30 and 11 p.m. on April 15, 1980? Sullivan wiped his eyes. "I was at the motel until my shift ended at 11. The night manager, Bill Crawford, came in at 10:45. I helped him with the handoff, then drove home to my apartment on Norwich Street. I lived with two roommates. They were both home when I got there around 11:30. We watched the news together, then I went to bed." "Your roommates corroborated this in 1980? "Yes. The police checked my alibi thoroughly. I passed 2 polygraphs. But they were asking if I'd hurt the Romers, if I'd robbed them, if I knew where they were. They never asked if I'd given them directions somewhere. I convinced myself that what I'd written on that notepad didn't matter, that it was probably just a coincidence, that they must have gone somewhere else after they left the motel." Morrison moved closer. "But you knew about the lagoon. You knew that Service Road was dangerous." "Not really," Sullivan protested. "I mean, I knew the old boat works was closed, but I didn't know there was water down that road. I'd never been back there myself. The area was pretty overgrown, and nobody had any reason to go there. If I'd known it was dangerous, I never would have mentioned it at all." Sarah made detailed notes documenting every word. Sullivan's story made sense, explained why the Romers had been driving north instead of south, why they'd been on that service road in the dark. But something still bothered her. "The notepad you gave them. Did you write down directions or just your uncle's name and the marina location?" "Just the name and Ocean Breeze Marina. I figured they'd ask for more specific directions when they got closer, or they'd see the sign like I said." "Did you tell them to call your uncle first?" Sullivan thought for a moment. I don't think so. I might have said something like, "Tell him Danny sent you," or mention my name, but I don't remember suggesting they call ahead. Mr. Romer seemed like the kind of man who would just drive over and introduce himself, especially if he was trying to be spontaneous for his wife. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Sullivan a photo of the recovered notepad. "Is this your handwriting?" Sullivan studied the image, then nodded slowly. "Yes, that's what I wrote for them." Ocean Breeze Marina and Sullivan. He looked up at her. They had it with them when they died. It was in the car, yes. Sullivan's face contorted with fresh anguish. They were following my directions. They were trying to find the place I sent them to, and instead they drove into the water. He buried his face in his hands. "Oh God, this is all my fault." "Mr. Sullivan," Sarah said firmly, "if what you're telling us is true, this was a tragic accident caused by a misunderstanding and poor signage in the dark. That's not the same as criminal culpability. But I lied to the police. I withheld information from the investigation." "That's something we'll need to discuss," Morrison said. "But right now, we need you to come down to the station and give us a formal statement. Everything you've told us today needs to be on record." Sullivan nodded, wiping his eyes. "Whatever you need, I'll tell you everything. I've been carrying this secret for 44 years, and I'm ready for it to be over." As they drove back to Brunswick with Sullivan following in his own vehicle, Sarah turned to Morrison. "Do you believe him?" Morrison was quiet for a moment, watching the road ahead. "I think I do. His story fits the evidence, the notepad, the direction they were traveling, the location of the lagoon. And the guilt he's carrying, that's real. You can't fake that kind of long-term remorse. But he lied in 1980. He obstructed the investigation. He was a scared kid who made a mistake and then compounded it by covering up. It doesn't make it right, but I understand why he did it." Morrison sighed. "What a goddamn tragedy. 2 people dead because a 20-year-old kid gave unclear directions, and there were 2 similar signs on the same road." Sarah thought about Charles and Catherine Romer, excited about planning a special anniversary surprise, following directions to what they thought would be a beautiful waterfront property. She imagined them driving down that service road in the dark, probably confused about why the entrance wasn't better maintained, maybe arguing about whether they had the right place. And then, suddenly the ground dropping away, the car plunging forward into black water, the terrible realization that they'd made a fatal mistake. "We need to verify Sullivan's story," she said. "Check if there really was an Ocean Breeze Marina, if his uncle was really a realtor, if those signs existed in 1980. "I can help with that," Morrison said. "I remember the old boat works. It closed when I was a kid, and there was a nicer marina further north. I think it might have been called Ocean Breeze, but I'd have to check. We can pull property records, talk to old-timers who might remember." Sarah's phone rang. It was Dr. Hayes. "Detective, we've completed the preliminary examination of the remains. Based on dental records that the family's attorney provided, we have positive identification. The bodies are definitely Charles and Catherine Romer. And there's something else you should know. We found evidence of blunt force trauma to Charles Romer's skull." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Trauma. It's consistent with impact against the steering wheel or dashboard during a sudden collision. When the car went into the water, if it hit hard enough, both occupants would have been thrown forward. Even with seatbelts, the force would have been significant. The trauma alone might not have been fatal, but combined with drowning. Hayes paused. They might have been unconscious when the water filled the car. In a way, that might have been a mercy. "Can you determine cause of death definitively?" "Drowning is the primary cause for both victims. The trauma was secondary. This is consistent with a vehicle accident where the car entered water rapidly." After ending the call, Sarah relayed the information to Morrison. "So it really was an accident," he said quietly. "They drove into the lagoon, hit hard enough to injure Charles, and drowned before they could escape." "That's what the evidence suggests," Sarah agreed. But something still nagged at her, a detail that didn't quite fit. She pulled out her notes, reviewing everything Sullivan had told them. "Chief," Sullivan said he gave them directions around 8:30 p.m. The lagoon is less than a mile from the motel. Even driving slowly, looking for the turn, they should have been there by 8:45, 9 at the latest. But when were they officially reported missing? Morrison accessed his files. The motel reported them missing the next morning, April 16th, when housekeeping found they hadn't slept in their room and their luggage was still there. But we established that they left the motel around 8:30 p.m. on the 15th. So somewhere between 8:30 p.m. and whenever they went into the water, there's unaccounted time. Where were they? Michael and Elizabeth Romer arrived in Brunswick the following morning, their faces marked by decades of uncertainty finally giving way to the harsh clarity of confirmed loss. Sarah met them in a private conference room at the police station, away from the media circus that had taken over the front entrance. Michael was tall and thin, with silver hair and his father's careful, measured movements. Elizabeth was smaller, with kind eyes that had seen too much grief. They sat close together, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other in a way that reminded Sarah of the couple they'd lost. "Thank you for coming," Sarah began. "I know this is incredibly difficult." "Difficult doesn't begin to cover it," Elizabeth said softly. Her voice carried a slight tremor. "For 44 years, we've imagined every possible scenario. We've hoped they were alive somewhere, feared they were murdered, wondered if we'd ever know the truth. And now," she paused, wiping her eyes, "now we know they spent all that time less than a mile from where they'd planned to spend the night." Sarah slid a folder across the table. "These are the preliminary findings from Dr. Hayes, our medical examiner. I want you to understand what we believe happened that night, based on the evidence we've recovered." Michael opened the folder, his hands steady despite the emotion on his face. He read silently for several minutes, Elizabeth looking over his shoulder. When he finally looked up, his expression was complicated, grief mixed with something that might have been relief. "An accident," he said. "After all these years, all the theories about kidnapping and murder, it was just an accident." "We believe so," Sarah confirmed. "But there are still some questions we're trying to answer. Your parents left their motel around 8:30 p.m. on April 15th. We've recovered evidence suggesting they were looking for a marina called Ocean Breeze, possibly to plan something for an anniversary. Did they mention anything like that to you?" Elizabeth's eyes widened. "Their anniversary? Of course. May 3rd would have been their 53rd wedding anniversary. Mother always made a big deal about anniversaries. She kept every card, every gift, wrote the dates in her calendar years in advance. And Father loved to surprise her," Michael added. "Every year he'd plan something special, a trip, a piece of jewelry, a romantic dinner. Even after 52 years of marriage, he still courted her like they were newlyweds." Sarah made notes. "So it's plausible that your father might have been looking for a venue or making arrangements for a surprise?" "Absolutely," Elizabeth said. "That's exactly the kind of thing he would do. He probably saw that they'd be in Brunswick for the night and thought it would be a perfect opportunity to plan ahead, maybe book something special for when they reached Florida." "There's something else," Sarah said carefully. "We've spoken with Danny Sullivan, the motel clerk who checked your parents in that night. He's now admitted that he gave your father directions to what he thought was the Ocean Breeze Marina, but there was confusion about the location. In the dark, your parents apparently took a wrong turn onto an old service road that led to the lagoon." Michael's jaw tightened. "This Sullivan, he lied to investigators in 1980. He withheld information, yes. He was young, frightened, and didn't understand the significance of what he'd done until it was too late. He's carried the guilt ever since." 44 years, Elizabeth said, her voice hard. "We spent 44 years not knowing what happened to our parents, and this man knew he'd sent them to the wrong place and said nothing?" "He didn't know they'd ended up in the water," Sarah explained. "He thought they must have gone somewhere else, that his directions were irrelevant to their disappearance. It wasn't until we found the notepad in the car that he realized the connection." Michael stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Brunswick street scene below. "I want to talk to him, this Danny Sullivan. I want to hear him explain why he let us suffer all these years." "That can be arranged," Sarah said. "But I need to ask you both some questions first, things that might help us understand the complete timeline of that night." "Ask us anything," Elizabeth said. Sarah consulted her notes. "Your father, was he a confident driver at night? Any vision problems? Medical conditions that might have affected his driving?" "His vision was fine," Michael said, returning to his seat. "He had reading glasses but didn't need them for driving, and he was healthy. He'd had a physical just 2 months before the trip. His doctor cleared him for travel, said he was in excellent shape for 75. What about his familiarity with the Brunswick area?" "They'd driven through dozens of times over the years," Elizabeth said, "always on their way to or from Florida. But they usually just stopped for gas or a quick meal, never stayed overnight. Brunswick was just a waypoint, not a destination." "Did your mother drive?" "She had a license but rarely drove, especially not on long trips. Father always insisted on driving. It was a control thing for him. He liked being in charge of the journey." Sarah leaned forward. "Here's what's puzzling me. The lagoon where we found the car is less than a mile north of the Royal Palms Motel. Even driving slowly, searching for the turn, that's maybe a 10-minute drive at most. But we have several hours unaccounted for between when they left the motel and when they presumably entered the water." Michael and Elizabeth exchanged glances. "What are you suggesting?" Michael asked. "I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm trying to understand where they went and what they did during that time. The evidence in the car suggests they were still following Sullivan's directions when they went into the water. The notepad was found in the passenger door pocket, indicating they'd been referring to it. But why would it take them hours to drive less than a mile?" "Maybe they got lost," Elizabeth offered. "Route 17 in 1980 wasn't as well lit as it is now. Maybe they drove past the turn, had to backtrack, got confused in the dark." "Possible," Sarah agreed. "Or maybe they went somewhere else first. Had dinner, drove around the area, made other stops before trying to find the marina." "You're thinking they went to that restaurant," Michael said, "the one the clerk recommended. Skipper's Seafood. It's still there actually, though under different ownership. I've got officers checking with them, looking at old records, seeing if anyone remembers a couple matching your parents' description that night." Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Morrison. "Found something. Come to my office." "Excuse me for just a moment," Sarah said, standing. "Can I get you anything? Coffee, water?" "We're fine," Elizabeth assured her. "Take your time." Sarah found Morrison in his office, surrounded by file boxes and old newspapers spread across his desk. He looked excited, the way cops get when a case starts breaking open. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a newspaper from April 1980. "I've been going through old records checking on Sullivan's story about the marinas. He was telling the truth. There were 2 similar signs on Route 17 in 1980. The Ocean Breeze Marina was a mile north, a nice facility that catered to wealthy yacht owners. The old Brunswick Boat Works, the one with the service road leading to the lagoon, had closed in 1976. The signs were almost identical, both weathered, both partially obscured by trees, so it's plausible that the roamers made an honest mistake. More than plausible, but here's the interesting part. Morrison pulled out another document, this one a property record. "I tracked down Tommy Sullivan, Danny's uncle. He was indeed a realtor in 1980, and he did handle the sale of the Ocean Breeze Marina property. But get this, the property didn't sell until August 1980, 4 months after the roamers disappeared, which means in April it was still available, still being shown to potential buyers. Did Tommy Sullivan show the property to anyone around that time? His records from back then are long gone, but I managed to track down his former secretary. She's 89 now, lives in a nursing home in Savannah. I called her this morning, and she remembers the Ocean Breeze Marina listing. She said Tommy showed it 3 or 4 times in the spring of 1980, always by appointment. He was very particular about that. The property was technically closed, no utilities, potentially dangerous for people wandering around in the dark. He never would have encouraged walk-ins. Sarah felt a piece of the puzzle shift into place. So even if the roamers had found the correct marina, Tommy Sullivan wouldn't have been there. He would have needed advance notice. Exactly. Which means Danny Sullivan's directions were not only unclear, they were also incomplete. He should have told Charles Romer to call his uncle first to arrange a showing. Danny was 20 years old, working a night shift at a budget motel. He probably wasn't thinking about the logistics. He just wanted to be helpful, wanted to impress a generous guest. Morrison nodded. I've done something else. I pulled phone records from the Royal Palms Motel from April 15, 1980. He slid a yellowed printout across the desk. This is a list of all outgoing calls made from the motel that evening, and there were 7 calls total between 6 p.m. and midnight. 2 were from the front desk, 1 to a pizza delivery, 1 to a taxi company. The other 5 were from guest rooms. Sarah scanned the list. Room 14, that was the Romer's room? That's right. And they made 1 call that evening at 7:47 p.m. It lasted 3 minutes. Who did they call? Morrison grinned. Skipper's Seafood. I checked the number against old phone books. They called the restaurant probably to check hours or make a reservation. So they were planning to eat there. Looks like it. And here's where it gets interesting. I sent an officer over to Skipper's this morning to talk to the current owner. The place has changed hands 3 times since 1980, but they keep old reservation books in storage for tax purposes. We found the book from April 1980. He pulled out a photo of a handwritten page. Sarah leaned in to read it. There, in faded ink, was an entry for April 15, 1980. Romer, party of 2, 8:30 p.m., table 7. They made a reservation, Sarah breathed, for 8:30, which means when they left the motel at 8:30, they weren't going to the restaurant, they were already late for their reservation. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. So something changed. They made a reservation at 7:47, but by 8:30 they'd decided not to go. Instead, they left the motel heading north, presumably looking for the Ocean Breeze Marina based on Sullivan's directions. Why the change in plans? Morrison asked. That's the question, isn't it? Sarah pulled out her phone and called Skipper's Seafood. The current owner answered, and she identified herself before asking, Your reservation book from April 15, 1980 shows a party of 2 under the name Romer for 8:30 p.m. Do you have any record of whether they showed up? She heard papers rustling. Let me check. Okay, I'm looking at the notes section. It says no-show next to their name, so they made the reservation but never arrived. Is there any record of them calling to cancel? No notation about that. If they'd called, the hostess would have noted it. We still do that today. Helps us track reliability for future reservations. Sarah thanked her and ended the call. She looked at Morrison. They never showed up, never called to cancel. Something happened between 7:47 when they made the reservation and 8:30 when they were supposed to be there. Could Sullivan have called their room? Morrison suggested. Given them more information, changed the plan? They checked the phone records again. No incoming calls to room 14 that evening. What if someone came to their room? Sarah said slowly. Sullivan said Charles Romer seemed eager to plan something special for his wife. Maybe Sullivan mentioned it to someone else, and that person offered to help, offered to take them to see the property personally. Morrison's expression darkened. You're thinking maybe this wasn't an accident after all. I don't know what I'm thinking yet. But we've got a gap in the timeline, nearly 45 minutes between when they should have left for their dinner reservation and when they actually left the motel. And we've got a change in plans that hasn't been explained. They went from planning a nice dinner to driving around in the dark, looking for a closed marina. We need to talk to Sullivan again, Morrison said. Find out if he mentioned the Romers to anyone else that night, if anyone overheard his conversation with Charles Romer, if anything unusual happened after they left. Sarah was already texting Danny Sullivan, asking him to come back to the station. His response came quickly. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She returned to the conference room where Michael and Elizabeth waited. Their faces were drawn, exhausted by the emotional weight of finally facing their parents' fate. I have an update, Sarah said, sitting back down. We've confirmed that your parents made a dinner reservation at Skipper's Seafood for 8:30 p.m. on April 15th, but they never showed up. We're trying to determine why they changed their plans and decided to look for the marina instead." Michael frowned. That doesn't sound like father. He was punctual, almost obsessively so. If he made a reservation, he'd keep it or call to cancel. He wouldn't just not show up. "Unless something more important came up," Elizabeth said. "Something he thought couldn't wait." "Like what?" Sarah asked. Elizabeth thought for a moment. If someone told him the marina was closing soon, or that the property was about to be sold, or that there was a limited time opportunity. Father was spontaneous when it came to surprising Mother, but he was also practical. If he thought he might miss his chance, he'd prioritize that over dinner. They could always eat later. It made sense. Charles Romer, excited about planning an anniversary surprise, hearing that he needed to act quickly, he might well abandon dinner plans to seize the opportunity. But who had given him that sense of urgency, and why? Danny Sullivan sat across from Sarah in the interview room, his hands clasped tightly on the table. Morrison stood by the door, arms crossed. Through the one-way glass, Michael and Elizabeth Romer watched, their faces unreadable. "Danny, I need you to think very carefully," Sarah began. "After you gave Charles Romer those directions, after they left the motel around 8:30, did you tell anyone else about the conversation?" Sullivan's brow furrowed. "Tell anyone? Like who?" "Anyone. Other staff members, guests, someone who might have overheard. Did you mention that the Romers were looking for a romantic venue? That you'd sent them to the marina?" I might have." Sullivan's eyes went distant, searching his memory. The night was slow. Bill Crawford, the night manager, came in early, maybe around 9 p.m. instead of his usual 10:45. We were talking, killing time until my shift ended. I might have mentioned it to him, about the nice old couple, the big tip, how the husband wanted to plan something special for his wife. "What exactly did you tell him?" "Just that I'd recommended my uncle's property, that maybe Mr. Romer would call Uncle Tommy to arrange something." Sullivan paused. "Bill made a joke about it, something about rich people always wanting special treatment. But it was just conversation, nothing serious." Sarah leaned forward. "Bill Crawford, where is he now?" "Dead. Heart attack in 1995, he was only 53. Another dead end." Sarah changed tactics. "What about other guests? Was anyone else in the lobby when you talked to Charles Romer?" Sullivan closed his eyes, visualizing the scene. "There was one other person, a man, maybe mid-40s, checked in about an hour before the Romers. He was sitting in the lobby reading a newspaper when Mr. Romer asked me about the marina. I remember because he looked up when Mr. Romer mentioned wanting to do something special for an anniversary. The man smiled, seemed amused by it." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What room was he in?" "I don't remember. It's been 44 years. Think, Danny, this could be important." Sullivan pressed his fingers to his temples. Room 9 or 11? I'm not sure, but I remember he paid cash, just like the Romers. And he only stayed one night." Morrison was already on his phone, pulling up the registration records from April 1980. After a moment, he shook his head. "The records from that period are incomplete. We've got some names, but no room assignments, and several entries are illegible." Sarah turned back to Sullivan. "Describe this man. Everything you remember." "Average height, maybe 5'10", dark hair, some gray at the temples. Dressed casually but expensively. I remember thinking his watch was nice, looked expensive. He had a southern accent, Georgia or maybe Alabama. Polite, didn't cause any trouble." "Did you see him leave?" "No. My shift ended at 11, and he was still there when I left. But like I said, he only stayed one night. He must have checked out the next morning." Sarah made detailed notes. "Did this man interact with the Romers at all?" "Not that I saw. He was just sitting there, reading, minding his own business." But Sarah's instincts were telling her something different. A man in the lobby, overhearing Charles Romer's plans, seeing an elderly couple with money. It was too coincidental. "Danny, After you gave Mr. Romer the directions, did you see him talk to anyone else? Did anyone approach him in the lobby? Sullivan's face suddenly changed, a memory surfacing. Wait, yes. When the Romers were leaving, they'd gone to their room, then came back through the lobby maybe 20 minutes later. That man, the one I mentioned, he was at the payphone near the front door. Mr. Romer had to walk past him to get outside. I wasn't paying close attention, but I think they might have exchanged words, just pleasantries probably. Excuse me, or after you, that sort of thing. Did the man follow them out? I don't know. I went to the back office to file some paperwork. When I came back, they were all gone. Sarah stood, pacing the small room. Let me get this straight. Charles Romer asks you about romantic venues. You give him directions to a marina. Another guest overhears this conversation. 20 minutes later, when the Romers are leaving, the same guest is conveniently near the exit. And the next morning, the Romers are missing and the guest has checked out. You think he had something to do with it? Sullivan's voice rose with alarm. You think he followed them, did something to them? I think we need to find out who he was. Morrison stepped forward. Even if we identify him, even if he did follow them, the physical evidence shows this was an accident. The car went into the water. They drowned. There's no sign of foul play. Unless he forced them off the road, Sarah countered. Ran them off, made it look like an accident. Why? Morrison challenged. Robbery? Charles Romer's wallet was still in the car, wedding rings still on their fingers. Nothing was taken. Sarah had to admit he had a point. But something felt wrong about the timing, the coincidences. She looked through the glass at Michael and Elizabeth Romer, saw the hope and fear warring on their faces. I want to talk to everyone who worked at that motel in April 1980, she said. Housekeepers, maintenance staff, anyone who might remember that night or that mystery guest. And I want to review every single missing person case and unsolved robbery in this area from that time period. If this guy was targeting wealthy travelers, the Romers might not have been his first victims. Sullivan leaned forward earnestly. Detective, I know I made a terrible mistake. I know I should have come forward in 1980, but please, you have to believe me. I didn't know. I didn't know what happened to them until yesterday. If I'd had any idea, any suspicion at all. I believe you, Sarah said, and she meant it. Danny Sullivan had made an error in judgment compounded by fear and youth. But he wasn't a killer. The question was, had there been one in the Royal Palms Motel that night, watching and waiting for an opportunity that Charles and Catherine Romer had unknowingly provided? Sarah left Sullivan in the interview room and went to talk to the Romers. They deserved to know everything, deserved to understand that their parents' deaths might not have been the simple accident everyone had assumed. There's a possibility, she began carefully, that someone at the motel that night took advantage of the situation. We don't know for certain, but... Find him, Michael interrupted, his voice steel. Whoever he was, whatever he did or didn't do, find him. My parents deserve justice, even if it comes 44 years too late. Sarah nodded. The case wasn't closed. It was just beginning.